Hey, what's up YouTube? Goratha here. Today I'm gonna talk about the build again. There's been another patch, which adds a lot of changes to the build again. So I figured I'd make another video and update you guys with exactly what's going on. The previous video we talked about Archmage being the way to scale endgame. That's still the best way to scale endgame. The patch changed a couple things which are mostly good, honestly. There is one change that affects us negatively, but we found a workaround that's actually even better than before. So I'll get into that as well. Yeah, let's get started. So the first big change is Frostwall is no longer visually bugged whenever you kill them. Before, we had a situation where Frostwalls would just not disappear after you kill them, leading to situations where we didn't know if we actually killed them or not, and then you just get blocked by them. It was kind of annoying, and this is actually one of the biggest changes for quality of life for this build. It feels so much better to map without this being a thing, to be honest with you. So that's really nice. The second major thing is wildshards is being completely changed. It was like a spiral before, and now it's more of a circle. I'll show you in game real quick. So now it's like, when it actually procs, it goes into like a big circle instead, like this. This has a couple implications. I believe it's actually a lot better for clear speed, especially with good gear. We're off-screening a lot more. The single target, I don't actually know if it's good or bad yet, to be honest with you. I don't really notice a big difference myself. Some people were saying their single target's worse, some people were saying their single target's better. I have to imagine it can't be that much different though, because you still are hitting all your fireballs off the Frostwall anyways, and they should, if anything, go through the flame wall easier now because they're in a circle. I assume if you're actually doing the rotation properly and you have all the fireballs going out this way, like Fortress works really well with this setup. The next big change, freezing bosses is now a lot harder, or specifically chain freezing bosses is a lot harder. This is another nerf to cast on trees. Cast on trees has gotten hit a couple times with nerfs. I believe this is not because of our build. I believe like rangers and invokers are just permanent freezing bosses. That's why this is getting changed. Yeah, cast on trees is pretty much just going to be for map clear now. I still think cold flame gloves or blue flame gloves are worth using. And heavy frost. Well, heavy frost got changed as well. That's the next change. Anyways, I still think cold damage is good. Heavy frost and the node next to it, the ice and climate change. These are all really good, like cold nodes. But I think this is still pretty good for mapping, especially, and cold damage especially is really good defensively. So not much is changing with cast on trees, other than like it's really bad for bosses. It kind of already was bad for bosses though, to be honest. With that in mind, I have come up with a really good bossing swap, like specifically pinnacle bosses, and that is cast on shock. Now, I was going to test this even before the changes, and I believe this was actually probably a lot better even before the changes. Cast on Shock procs a lot more on bosses. I believe this is a significant damage increase. It feels like you're playing Cast on Crit, except without the downsides of it being costing more spirit and the damage downside. Cast on Shock of this build is just really good. Some people have told me that they have issues proccing it. I have no issues at all proccing my Cast on Shock. I believe it's just because shock is based on the amount of damage you're dealing. If you are having issues dealing shocks, I believe you should take nodes like this right here, where you have increased chance to shock, and like maybe jewel nodes that have increased chance to shock as well. Could be really good. But yeah, if you're having any issues with single target, cast and shock is the way to go. One big thing for this though is sustain will be a big problem. Because it's proccing so much, you're definitely gonna need to put inspiration on it. Probably as like the 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 like then. The cast on shock, really good for bosses. However, it does have its own downside. It doesn't really proc while you're mapping. So, in my case, I can map without cast on shock or cast on trees. I'm okay doing either one. I'll kill map bosses just as fast. Cast on trees is a little better because it procs more for mapping. I generally just keep cast on trees on, and then on pinnacles, I'll swap to cast on shock. That seems to be the best way for me. If you're really struggling with single target though, maybe you can consider using cast on shock all the time. This will help a lot with the map bosses especially, but your clear speed will suffer, keep in mind. I tested dropping the blue flame gloves with cast and shock. I think it's something you can do. I still personally, like I said, I really enjoyed the cold nodes. I haven't done it yet. I don't think I will even. Probably gonna test it out just to see, but you could get like a really good pair of rare gloves instead. I think freeze is so strong defensively though that I didn't really like it when I was testing it. Fireball no longer freezing, it just felt bad to me. With that in mind, the next big change. Yeah, so there was like 4 or 5 changes in one patch that actually affected our build, which is kind of crazy. Anyways, there's another change. Heavy Frost. This is another buff, actually. Now, Heavy Frost has been changed from hits ignore elemental resistances to hits ignore non-negative. So before, if the enemy res was negative, you would ignore that as well. So it would just be 0 no matter what. Now, if you actually use exposure and curses, and you reduce the monster res, Heavy Frost is actually really good because it doesn't negate that at all. With that in mind, we are chaining our gem links a little bit for both the single target and bossing. Lightning exposure is really, really good on Frostwall. This is another change. It got buffed to not have the damage downside. Before it had 25% less damage, now it has no downside. We're running Frostwall with lightning exposure. Now that's probably going to be the 5th link. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but you no longer need Icicle on Frostwall if you're playing Archmage. Icicle and the Shattered Crystal nodes were both not really required after swapping to Archmage because we're increasing our base damage by so much. Frostwalls kind of just die right away anyways. At least for me, I've noticed I don't need either one of them. However, if you are still needing needing Icicle to one-shot, I would put that as your 3 link. So it's important to one-shot the wall. That's the most important thing. And then obviously Glaciation for the freeze develop is really nice. This is going to be how you proc Heavy Frost really often and cast and freeze while mapping. Consider casting. This is another big change. This has been increased to 40% more damage for spell hits. Before we had this on our cast on freeze. It still works tactically on cast on freeze, but it's a bug. It's supposed to not work on triggers anymore. You're supposed to have to actually cast. With that in mind, I swapped it from cast on freeze and cast on shock into Frostwall. Frostwall doing more damage is really good. It hits really hard. The less cast speed is really annoying on Frostwall. Or sorry, really annoying on Fireball because Fireball has a really high base cast time already. So consider casting is just painful to be honest with you. I actually kind of even like to use Arcane Tempo sometimes on Fireball while mapping, but I don't recommend it if your gear is kind of on the lower end. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that changed with the gem links. Like I said, I am using the cast on shock for bosses now. I've messed around with Mana Tempest. It's an ability that gives you extra damage, but it drains your life and mana super fast. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it for Blood Mage. It's something you can mess around with though. It gives a lot of damage, but you just pretty much die instantly using it, so be aware. I'm not putting in the build guide because I believe it would cause more problems than I would like, basically. Something to keep in mind though, if you're an experienced player, you can mess around with that. Yeah, the gear pretty much didn't change. We're still using Snake Pit. I think Snake Pit is really good, actually. This ring helps a lot with single target and clear speed. The fork is really good, especially in indoor maps, because it'll bounce off the walls, and it's just really good, honestly. Not much to be said about that. Still using all the same gear here. A lot of people are asking me how do I get the 30 cert on the helmet. This is the corruption. It's very strong because you get to use the helmet, and you can put on Grim Feast with just the helmet. Speaking of which, I forgot to mention something with the gem links. On bosses, if you do have enough for Grim Feast, you can swap Grim Feast for Vitality and Clarity. Because Grim Feast won't really do much on bosses. This will help a lot with your sustain. This gem swap. Like I said, I would only really do this on Pinnacles because gem swapping is kind of annoying. But if you have issues, you could do this on map bosses too if you like. Yeah, the gear didn't really change. We have the helmet. I would recommend... You could probably actually do the Archmage swap without Grim Feast. Have 160 and just run cast on Freeze Shock with Archmage. That would be completely fine. You don't necessarily need this. This is really nice quality of life, but not really required. Yeah, the rest of my gear didn't really change. There was another big change with the patch, though, that made gearing a lot easier. Now we have 20% more res, because they basically nerfed the reduced res you get from mapping. So now you just have more res to play around with. This is actually a pretty big buff for our build, because we're using 3 unique items. This helps us a lot with gearing. Before, you kind of had to have really good res gear to even fit in these 3 items. Like Snake Pit was kind of a struggle. Now it should be a lot easier. And they also nerfed monsters dealing chaos damage. So we no longer need as much chaos damage. Or chaos res. Both volatiles and the flower explosions are both nerfed significantly. I believe the volatiles are actually just removed completely. So this patch has been pretty huge for us. I think overall the build is way better. I haven't died a single time while mapping on it. The bossing is insane. I'll show you guys some footage of the cast and shock. It's actually ridiculous. The only struggle I have right now is I run out of mana too fast because it's rocking too much, which is crazy because I was having no mana issues before. So as soon as I solve that, I'll probably go crazy. Thing of mana, if you ever have any issues, make sure you take Deep Trance. The reduced cost of skills applies to both the mana and life. And you can also anoint the considered casting and mental toughness. Both of these reduce the mana cost. Yeah, like I said, the end game, like, the mapping has been a lot better now. The fireballs go in a circle. It's pretty nice for bossing. For me, it's been really nice. I've been messing around with using cognitivity as well. Exposure seems really good for a single target as well, so keep that in mind. I've been using light exposure on the Frostwall. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about. This might be the last video on the character for a while. I am working on a full build guide on Max Troll, so that should be coming very soon, and I'll post that in the description below as soon as it comes out. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time.